The wind comes in at 19 knots across the Mojave Flats, carrying sand and cold and the particular silence that settles over desert when the temperature drops below freezing. It is Christmas Eve. The sky is the color of a bruise, purple at the edges, black overhead, stars so sharp and clear they look like they've been cut into the darkness with a knife. At the far end of a 1,200-meter range, 24 steel targets stand in staggered positions, some partially concealed behind low berms, others angled at oblique positions designed to give riflemen the smallest possible surface area to work with. The targets haven't moved. The scores have already been logged. 12 Navy SEALs, operators with a combined total of more than 90 years of field experience between them, have just completed their evaluation run and posted a collective headshot rate of 75%. 18 clean kills out of 24 rounds, shooting in 31-degree air with gusting crosswind and failing light. That is not a poor performance. That is, by any objective measure, an exceptional one. Now a 17-year-old girl in an oversized parka is walking to the firing line. She has 4 rounds. She takes her time adjusting the bipod legs. She doesn't look at the SEALs watching her from the observation platform. She doesn't look at the captain standing 20 feet behind her with his hands clasped behind his back. She loads, settles into position, checks her wind readings once, and then she goes completely still. The kind of still that makes you wonder if she's even breathing. 4 rounds. 4 headshots. The last one at 1,000 meters in a 19-knot gusting crosswind. Master Chief Petty Officer Dale Hayes will later describe the moment he watched that final steel plate ring out as the single most unsettling professional experience of his career. Not because of what she did, because of how she did it. Without urgency, without performance, without any visible awareness that what she had just done was supposed to be impossible for a teenager on her first evaluated range session. She simply did the thing, stood up, clicked the safety, and handed the rifle back to the armor like she was returning a library book. How old did you say she was? Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Webb asked nobody in particular. Nobody answered. That question, how old, how possible, how, is what this story is actually about. The facility doesn't have a proper name. Officially, it's listed on federal land records as an auxiliary evaluation site. Coordinates on file with NAV specific access restricted to personnel with the appropriate clearance level. Unofficially, the 12 men assigned to skeleton duty over the Christmas holiday call it the Icebox, because in December the Mojave at elevation doesn't behave like the desert most people picture. There is no warmth here, no red rock glow, no cinematic sunset burning orange. There is wind and cold and sand that gets into everything. Food, weapons, bedrolls, teeth, and a darkness that arrives early and stays late. The duty rotation for the holiday week was drawn by lottery 6 weeks prior. Nobody volunteered. 12 names came out of the pool and 12 men swore quietly to themselves and started rearranging phone calls to family. This was the nature of the work, and they understood it. But understanding something doesn't make it feel better on the 24th of December when your family is 800 miles away gathering around a table you should be sitting at. Master Chief Hayes had pulled holiday duty 3 times in his career. He was 38 years old, built like someone had started making a man out of hardwood and never softened the angles. 16 years in the teams, 2 combat deployments in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, a classified rotation in a place the official records still describe as undisclosed location. He had a daughter in San Diego named Ellie who was 9 years old and currently possessed of the unshakable belief that her father was simply too busy to be home on Christmas, not that the Navy had decided his schedule for him. He had been carefully maintaining this fiction for going on 4 years. It was, he privately acknowledged, one of the more morally complicated things he had done in a career that included several things that still visited him at 3 in the morning. The other 11 men on skeleton duty ranged from Petty Officer Webb, 26, 3rd deployment, had the particular sharp-edged humor that develops in people who have been shot at enough times that it no longer fully surprises them, to Senior Chief Raymond Okafor, 41, who was the only one of them who seemed genuinely unbothered by the holiday assignment. Okafor was from Lagos originally and had converted to Christianity late in life, meaning Christmas held for him a fairly recent and specific spiritual significance that had not yet acquired the cultural weight of obligation that wore down the others. He had set up a small tree in the common area using green chemistry lights and strips of 550 card. It was, everyone agreed, both terrible and oddly touching. The facility itself consisted of 5 structures: a main barracks building that smelled permanently of cleaning solvent and old coffee, a weapons vault, a range control booth that overlooked the full extent of the evaluation course, a motor pool garage housing 2 Hums and a desert patrol vehicle that needed new brake pads, and a supply building where someone in the previous rotation had left 3 boxes of MREs, a case of bottled water, and, inexplicably, a frozen apple pie still in its original packaging. Nobody had touched the pie. There was an unspoken sense that it was being saved for something, though nobody could have articulated what. December 24th began exactly like December 23rd had, and December 22nd before that. 500 Rivali, weapons checks, range maintenance, facility security sweep, meals from the MRE cache supplemented by whatever the duty cook could produce from the surprisingly well-stocked dry storage cabinet. The temperature at first light was 29 degrees Fahrenheit with forecast highs reaching a maximum of 37. The wind advisory called for gusts up to 22 knots through the afternoon hours, tapering slightly after dark. They ran their morning PT in the cold because the cold was not a reason to skip PT. They cleaned weapons that were already clean because that was also not a reason to skip weapons cleaning. Hayes ran 2 miles around the facility perimeter before breakfast, a personal ritual he maintained regardless of location, regardless of conditions, for reasons he had never examined closely enough to explain. The Mojave at dawn smelled like dust and sage and something mineral and cold that he had never been able to identify but that he associated irrevocably with this kind of work, this kind of life. The kind of life that put you here instead of home. He was on his 2nd cup of coffee, considering whether to initiate the afternoon range qualification that the rotation schedule required, when he heard the vehicle. Not a Humvee. The sound was different, heavier, more deliberate. A vehicle moving at the specific speed of someone who knows where they're going and isn't in a hurry to explain themselves when they get there. Hayes set down his coffee and walked to the window. The vehicle was a dark gray government plate SUV, the kind that appears with some regularity in the vicinity of things that don't officially exist. It stopped at the main gate. The gate guard, Petty Officer 3rd Class Torres, 24 and from Phoenix, currently wearing 4 additional layers under his uniform, checked the credentials that the driver offered through the window, looked at them for a long moment, looked at the passenger in the back seat, looked at the credentials again, and then opened the gate. Hayes watched the SUV pull into the facility parking area and stop. The driver, a man in civilian clothes whose posture communicated military even out of uniform, got out and opened the rear door. The passenger who stepped out was a tall man in the pressed uniform of a Navy captain, oak leaves and command insignia catching the flat winter light. He carried a single briefcase-style document case and moved with the economy of someone accustomed to walking into situations that were not expecting him. The second passenger was smaller. She was wearing civilian clothes, dark outdoor pants, trail boots, and a parka that was several sizes too large for her frame. The kind of oversized fit you get when gear is sourced by logistics rather than fit to the individual. A green watch cap pulled low, backpack over one shoulder. She stepped out of the vehicle and looked at the facility with the calm, inventory-taking expression of someone assessing new terrain rather than arriving at a strange place. She appeared to be, at absolute maximum, 17 years old, possibly younger. Hayes was already moving toward the door. The captain's name was Vance. He confirmed this in the first 5 seconds. No rank offered beyond the uniform's advertisement, no command affiliation, no unit. Just Vance. The way people in certain parts of the institutional apparatus use single names as both introduction and boundary. Master Chief Hayes. It was not a question. He already knew. Captain. Hayes matched the formality, reading the room quickly. This was not a social call. Wasn't expecting company today, sir. Vance looked around the facility in the same inventory-taking way the girl had. Hayes noticed this, filed it, and did not yet know what to do with the observation. I understand that. This is a last-minute evaluation request. I apologize for the timing. Evaluation for... Hayes let the sentence hang open. Huh. Vance indicated the girl, who was standing slightly to the side, pack at her feet, watching the exchange with what Hayes could only describe as patience. Not passivity. Patience. The distinction mattered in ways he was already beginning to feel without being able to articulate. Standard desert marksmanship evaluation. Sniper course configuration. Your range, your equipment, your protocols. Sir, with respect, Hayes stopped himself. She's authorized. Vance opened the document case and produced a single manila folder, which he handed over. The folder had the particular weight and dimension of a personnel file, but when Hayes opened it, nearly everything was black. Redaction bars covering name, DOB, service history, training background, unit affiliation. The photograph in the upper left corner showed a young female with steady eyes and no visible expression. The authorizing signature at the bottom was real. He recognized the office, the clearance level, the specific classification marking that meant don't ask follow-up questions. What am I evaluating for? Performance against standard metrics. Same course your team runs. Same course. Hayes looked at the girl again. She was now looking at him directly, not with challenge or defensiveness, but with a quality of attention that was strangely familiar, the concentrated present-tense awareness he associated with operators before a known engagement. Same targets, same distances. Correct. Sir, the long course goes to 1,200 meters. Last target position is. I'm aware of the course specifications, Master Chief. Hayes closed the folder. He looked at Vance for a moment, reading the man's face the way you learn to read faces after enough years around people who are paid to control what their faces communicate. He found nothing useful there. He looked at the girl one more time. What's her name? Vance's answer was simple, immediate, and completely uninformative. She doesn't have one on file. The team took the news about as well as could be expected from 12 Navy SEALs who had just been told they were spending Christmas Eve running a marksmanship evaluation for a civilian teenager whose identity was classified. Marcus Webb's response was immediate and profane, but he kept it below the threshold of anything Vance could officially hear. Senior Chief Okafor looked at the situation with the expression of a man calculating theological implications. A petty officer named Diaz simply stared at the girl for several seconds, seemed to arrive at no useful conclusion, and went back to cleaning the rifle he'd been cleaning before the interruption. She looks like she should be in high school, Webb said under his breath, standing next to Hayes at the range control booth window. Below them, the girl was in the weapons vault with the range armor, going through the equipment familiarization protocol like she'd done it before. She handled the rifle the way she had handled arriving at the facility. Without fanfare, without performance, with calm, systematic attention. She looks like she's done this before, Hayes said. She's a kid. She's an authorized evaluee with a classification I'm not going to argue with on Christmas Eve. He turned away from the window. We run the course first. She watches our run. She sees the conditions, the wind readings, the target configurations. Then she gets our evaluation. How many rounds? 4. He said it flat. Webb blinked. 4 rounds on a 24 target course. That's what's in the evaluation specification. That's not an evaluation, Chief. That's a showcase. Hayes didn't disagree. He also didn't say anything else. They ran the afternoon marksmanship evaluation in teams of 3, rotating through the firing positions in sequence. The course was set at its standard configuration. 24 targets at staggered distances from 300 to 1,200 meters, target profiles ranging from full silhouette at close range to partial exposures no wider than 18 inches at the long end. Wind had built through the midday hours and was now consistent at 16 knots with irregular gusts reaching 20 plus, the kind of variable condition that made ballistic calculation feel less like mathematics and more like informed guesswork at distances beyond 800 meters. They shot well. This was not surprising. These were operators for whom marksmanship was not a skill but a physical truth, as foundational to identity as anything could be. They had spent thousands of hours in positions like this, in conditions like these, in places considerably more consequential than a training facility in the Mojave on a quiet December afternoon. 18 of 24 rounds connected with the head zones of the steel targets. 6 rounds missed or struck non-critical zones. 4 of those at the long distances where the wind was at its most unpredictable, 2 at mid-range on the oblique angle targets where the head exposure was under 12 inches. 7 to 5%. They logged the score at 1,547 hours in the range book, packed out their brass, and returned their equipment to the armor. The girl had watched the entire run from the observation platform. She stood at the railing in her oversized parka, hood down despite the cold, a small spiral notebook open in her hand. She had been writing in it throughout, and when Webb walked past her on his way down from the platform, he craned his neck to see what she'd been recording. She angled the notebook away without looking at him. It was not hostile. It was simply private. "You write down our misses?" Webb asked. The question was sharper than he'd intended. She looked at him then. Her eyes were dark brown, and there was something in them that Webb would spend several minutes later that evening trying to name and finally settle on patience again, the same quality Hayes had noticed. "I wrote down the wind readings and your shot timing," she said. "I counted the flags. There were 3 wind indicator flags mounted at intervals along the range." She had been watching the flags, tracking the gusts, correlating them with the timing of each shot. Webb didn't say anything else. He went down the stairs and stood near the range control booth and looked at nobody in particular. She was given the rifle at 1,603 hours. The wind was now at 17 knots base with intermittent gusts recorded at 21. Temperature had dropped to 31 degrees Fahrenheit. The light was going, not dark yet, but the quality of December late afternoon had arrived, that flat, gray-edge dimming that makes distances harder to read and colors unreliable. 4 rounds. She had 4 rounds and a 24-target course and the entire team watching her, half of them from the observation platform, the rest scattered at range control and the scoring station. She took 12 minutes to set up her firing position. This was longer than any of the team's individual setups, and Hayes heard someone muttering about it, but he didn't turn around to address it because he was watching her and what he was watching was interesting. She wasn't slow. She was methodical in the way that very good surgeons are methodical. No wasted movement, no hurrying, everything placed and adjusted and verified before the next step. She adjusted the bipod legs twice. She spent 2 full minutes on the scope settings, cross-referencing something on a small laminated card that she produced from a chest pocket. She checked the wind indicator flags 3 times. She settled the breathing and then she went still. The first shot broke at 16:15. Target 7, 640 meters, partial exposure behind a low berm, head profile of approximately 14 inches. The steel rang. "Head shot." "Lucky," somebody said quietly. Nobody confirmed or denied it. The second shot came 90 seconds later. Target 14, 880 meters, angled at 60 degrees to the firing line, presenting a head profile that Hayes estimated at 11 inches of visible surface area. The steel rang. "Headshot." Nobody said anything this time. The third round was the one that shifted the air in the observation area in some way that Hayes couldn't immediately explain. He felt it as a physical thing, a change in the quality of the collective attention of 11 professional operators watching a girl they had not yet decided to take seriously. The target was number 19, 1,000 meters, full silhouette but placed behind a partial berm with head exposure only, the target angled slightly away from the firing line. The flag at the 900-meter marker was showing a steady 15 knots from the northwest. Then a gust hit. Hayes watched the flag jump, saw it go taut and horizontal, heard the wind across the platform. 20 knots, maybe more. She fired in the gust. Not despite it. In it. Like she'd waited for it. The steel rang at 1,000 meters. Senior Chief Okafor made a sound that was not quite a word. "She doped that shot in a gusting crosswind at 1,000 meters, said the range officer, a lieutenant who had not said anything until now. He said it quietly, carefully, like he was reading something aloud that he didn't entirely believe. The fourth round was at 16:22. Target 23, 1,200 meters. The last target on the course. It was, in standard evaluation protocol, the position where even the best performers accepted a meaningful probability of miss. The combination of distance, wind drift, environmental variables, and the cumulative physical cost of sustained shooting position made the 1,200-meter target the honest assessment point, the place where physical limits declared themselves honestly. She lay there for 4 minutes. The range was completely silent. 11 men watching. Hayes watching. Vance watching from the periphery of the observation platform, his face showing nothing. The rifle fired. The steel at 1,200 meters rang out across the Mojave Flats, the sound arriving a beat after the impact because of the distance, that slight delay that always makes confirmation feel like memory. 4 rounds. 4 headshots. The longest at 1,200 meters in a 19-knot gusting crosswind. 75% was what the team had posted. She had posted 100% on a course where she'd been given 1/6 of the rounds. Her effective hit rate, measured against the precision requirement of the evaluation, was not 3 times better than the team's performance. It was, by the specific metric of headshot confirmation, 3 times better and done in a fraction of the attempts. She stood up from the firing position, clicked the safety, and handed the rifle back to the armor. "Evaluation complete," she said. The common area that evening was quiet in the particular way of spaces where something has happened that everyone is still processing. MREs sat mostly untouched. Coffee was being consumed at a rate inversely proportional to anyone's actual thirst. Okafor's chemistry-light Christmas tree cast its green glow across the corner of the room, and nobody had commented on it, which meant everyone was distracted. Hayes found Webb at the coffee station. "Talk to me." Webb stayed into his cup. "You know what my hit rate is at 1,200 in standard conditions?" 70%. 73, actually. Good conditions. Today's conditions. I'd give myself 50-50 on that last shot. He looked up. She didn't miss, Chief. Not once. And she doped that third shot with a gust running. She didn't wait for the wind to drop. She used it. I know. She used the wind. He said it again. Not for Hayes's benefit, but because he was still working through it. How do you train someone to use the wind at 1,000 meters? That's not basic marksmanship. That's not even advanced marksmanship the way we understand it. He shook his head. I don't have a word for what that is. Instinct, Hayes said. You don't have instinct at 17. Hayes put down his own cup. You have it if someone taught you right. He left Webb with that and walked down the corridor toward the east wing of the barracks, which was the quieter side of the building, the side that looked out over the range rather than the parking area. He was thinking about the redacted file, the 4-round allotment, the way she'd checked the wind flags all afternoon. He was thinking about instinct and teaching and the question of how a 17-year-old girl came to be standing in the Mojave Desert on Christmas Eve with a classified identity and a marksmanship capability that had just silenced a room full of Navy SEALs. He turned the corner into the east corridor and stopped. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, knees drawn up, her parka bundled beside her as a seat cushion. She was holding a photograph in both hands, looking at it with an expression that he recognized immediately and that had nothing to do with marksmanship or evaluation protocols or classified programs. It was grief. Pure, private, the kind you carry in photographs and anniversaries and specific days of the year when it sits heavier than other days. She looked up when she heard him stop. She didn't hide the photograph, but she didn't offer it either. She simply waited. Hayes leaned against the opposite wall. He didn't crowd her. He didn't turn away and give her the privacy she might have preferred, because he had learned long ago that solitude and loneliness were not the same thing and that sometimes the right move was to be present without demanding anything. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "I don't sleep much." The statement was matter-of-fact. No request for sympathy in it. "Me neither." He nodded toward the photograph she was still holding. "You don't have to show me." She looked at it for a moment longer, then held it out. It was a man, mid-30s, maybe older, with the same dark eyes she had, the same quality of watchful stillness in the expression. He was in cold-weather gear, not quite civilian, not quite standard military issue, standing in snow against what looked like a forested ridge somewhere cold and northern. He was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that existed alongside rather than instead of seriousness. A man comfortable with both things at once. "My father," she said. Hayes looked at the photograph for a moment, then handed it back carefully. "Special operations." A beat of silence. "How did you know?" The way he's standing." He paused. "The way you shoot." She looked down at the photograph again. "He taught me. Since I was 8. She said it without preamble, without build-up, like it was geography rather than history. We'd go out every winter, north of where we lived, up into the higher elevation where the temperature dropped early and the wind came off the ridgeline. He said that anyone could shoot in good conditions. He said good conditions were a luxury and that real shooting happened in the kind of weather that made most people go inside. Hayes listened. We'd spend whole weekends out there. He'd set targets at distances I didn't have any business shooting at when I was young. And then we'd sit there for as long as it took until I understood what the wind was doing. Not fighting it, understanding it. He said wind at long range isn't an obstacle. He said it's information. He sounds like a good teacher. He was. She said it in the past tense with the ease of long practice. The way people learn to say was when saying is no longer an option and the adjustment has been made, however unwillingly. He died 6 years ago. Hayes did the math without wanting to. She was 17. She'd been 11. I'm sorry, he said. He meant it exactly the way he said it. Not as a social formula, but as a specific acknowledgement, one professional recognizing another's loss in a field where loss was not theoretical. Christmas Day, she said. 6 years ago tomorrow. She looked at the photograph once more, then tucked it carefully into the chest pocket of her civilian shirt, the same pocket where the laminated card had been. Classified operation. I was never given a full explanation. The file, she paused. Most of it isn't something they share with family members of personnel who died in operations that didn't officially happen. The particular cruelty of that sentence settled over Hayes like the cold. After he died, she continued, her voice steady, not performing the steadiness but genuinely inhabited by it. There wasn't a lot left. My mother wasn't. She wasn't around. Extended family, but nothing that would have. It was complicated. She looked up at him then, directly, the same quality of full attention she had given the range flags all afternoon now directed at him. Captain Vance found me about 8 months later. Said there was a program. Said my father had flagged me for it, years before. Said there was a file going back to when I was 9 that he'd been building without telling me. Hayes felt something shift in his chest. A father filling out a file on a 9-year-old daughter for a program she might need someday if the worst happened. The specific kind of foresight that only people who understood the realistic probability of worst cases engaged in. He filed paperwork. He filed a lot of paperwork. Something that was not quite a smile moved across her face. Everything organized. Everything clearly documented. My training logs, my shot records going back to when I was 10, evaluation notes in his handwriting, range data, environmental condition logs. She paused. He was very thorough. Sounds like it. Vance said the program had been looking for people with specific combinations of background. Early training. High-stress early environment. Particular neurological profile. She said the clinical language without self-consciousness, like she was reading from a document she'd reviewed many times. He said my father understood what he was building. That he wasn't just teaching me to shoot. He was building something that could survive what happened after he was gone. Hayes didn't have a response that was adequate to that. He didn't try to produce one. They sat in the corridor in the cold of the east wing, the chemistry-light tree casting green shadows from the common area down the hall, the range dark and quiet outside the windows, and Hayes thought about fathers and daughters and the particular weight of preparation made for tragedies that couldn't be named yet. How long have you been in the program? He asked finally. 14 months, she said. Since a month after I turned 16. He kept his face still, because keeping his face still was a skill he had. What does the program look like? She tilted her head slightly. You have enough clearance to be asking that. It was not insolent. It was a genuine inquiry, a habit of information security applied consistently regardless of context or social pressure. He almost smiled. Probably not. Then I can't answer that, she said simply. Sorry. Don't be. He stood, his knees registering the cold floor they'd been holding him against. He looked down at her for a moment, this 17-year-old with her father's eyes and her father's teaching inside her bones, sitting on the floor of a classified facility in the Mojave on Christmas Eve because the world had made a series of decisions that had landed her here instead of somewhere that made more sense for a person her age. There's coffee in the common area, he said, and an apple pie that nobody has touched yet. I was thinking we might open it tonight. She looked at him with an expression that was harder to read than anything she'd shown on the firing line. Something careful in it. Something that wanted to say yes but was checking first whether yes was something she was allowed to want. Okay, she said. The pie was good. It was not, perhaps, in the top echelon of pies Hayes had encountered in his life, but it was warm. Okafor had found a way to heat it using the facility's aging convection oven in a combination of aluminum foil and creative temperature management. And it was apple, and it existed in that specific category of food that tastes better in a cold place among people who need something to organize around. 11 seals and a 17-year-old girl with no name on file ate apple pie on the 24th of December in the Mojave Desert, and for approximately 4 to 5 minutes, the questions that the afternoon had generated were set aside in favor of something simpler. Webb, who had been the sharpest skeptic and had spent the afternoon constructing increasingly elaborate explanations for what he'd witnessed at the range, ended up sitting across from her and asking, with a directness that characterized everything he did, "Where'd you learn to dope wind like that?" She looked at him. "My father taught me to feel it first. He said if you couldn't feel it in your body, you couldn't trust what the instruments were telling you. He'd make me stand in the wind for an hour before I picked up a rifle. Just stand in it." Webb absorbed this. "How do you practice that?" "Standing in wind. You go somewhere with wind," she said, "and you stand in it. And you pay attention." She said it simply, not dismissively. Like the answer was actually that straightforward. He said most people treat wind like weather. He said it's not weather. It's physics. And physics is information. Torres, the youngest member of the team, who had been the quietest all evening, leaned forward with the unguarded curiosity of someone young enough that professional dignity hadn't yet completely overridden genuine interest. "Did you know you were training for? Did you know what it was going to be used for?" She was quiet for a moment. "When I was young, I thought it was just something my dad and I did. Our thing." She looked at her coffee cup. "Later, I understood it was preparation." A pause. "I don't think he wanted me to be in this field. I think he wanted me to be able to survive it if I ended up here. There's a difference." The room was quiet. Okafor's green tree glowed in the corner. Senior Chief Okafor, who had been listening from his position near the coffee station with the particular attentiveness of a man who takes other people's stories seriously, said, "What was his name?" "Your father." She looked at him for a moment. The answer to this question was, Hayes suspected, somewhere in the black bars of the redacted file. "I'm not supposed to say." Okafor nodded gravely. "Then we'll call him a soldier who prepared well." Something in her face moved then, not fully, not into the territory of visible emotion, but at the edges, where the control was thinner. She looked at her coffee cup and did not say anything else for a moment. Diaz, who had barely spoken all evening, reached behind him without comment and came back with a small object that he set on the table in front of her. It was a patch, hand-stitched, 2 inches across, a simple white snowflake design on a field of dark green with a small star at the center. Hayes recognized it. Diaz made them, had been making them since his second deployment as a way to mark operations and dates that meant something but couldn't be documented officially. He had given them to the team members over the years for moments that deserved commemoration but couldn't be written down. "Desert Knoll," Diaz said, which was not quite an explanation but was enough of one. "For tonight." She picked it up and looked at it for a long time. "Thank you," she said. She said it the way people say things when the thing they mean is larger than the words available, and they know it, and they say the smaller words anyway because they're the ones they have. Hayes watched her hold the patch and thought about a man who had stood in northern snow teaching his daughter to feel the wind, filling out contingency paperwork when she was 9, building something that could survive the worst day. He thought about the kind of love that presents itself as training. He thought about the weight of preparation made for disasters that were hoped to never arrive but planned for with full professional seriousness because the alternative, unpreparedness, was a different kind of abandonment. He was thinking about this when the perimeter alarm tripped. 3 simultaneous contact indicators. East wall sensor array, north gate camera, south bear motion detector. The alert came through the range control booth speaker at 2,247 hours with a flat, mechanical tone that sounded nothing like urgency and meant everything like it. Hayes was on his feet before the second tone finished. The room went from 4 to 5 minutes of apple pie and something close to warmth into immediate operational configuration in approximately 4 seconds. Webb had his sidearm from the holster on the chair back before his coffee cup stopped rocking from where he'd set it down. Okafor was already moving toward the weapons vault. Torres was at the range control console, pulling up the camera feeds. 3 contacts, Torres called. East wall, 1. North approach, 1. South berm. I've got a thermal signature, elevated position, south berm, approximately 700 meters. Elevated position. Hayes processed that immediately. Long gun. Overwatch. They have a spotter up, he said. Not a question. Looks like it. She had stood up from the table when the alert sounded, and she was standing now, not frozen, not confused, but still in that inventory-taking way, reading the room, calculating. She looked at Hayes. He looked at her for exactly 1 second, making a decision that he would later spend considerable time examining from multiple angles. Then he looked at Okafor. Get her a rifle. Webb's head came around. Chief. Get her a rifle, Hayes said again. And this time it was not open to discussion. The cold outside the facility door hit like a physical object, 29 degrees Fahrenheit, and wind still running at 17 knots. The desert dark and clear and enormous in every direction. Hayes moved along the east wall with Webb and Torres flanking him, weapons up, using the facility's exterior lighting shadows to stay out of the illuminated zones. Okafor and 2 others were moving to cover the north gate approach. The remaining team members were securing the interior. She was behind Hayes with the rifle Okafor had pulled from the vault, a Mk21 PSR and .338 Lapua, the same caliber she'd been evaluated with that afternoon. She moved the way she'd moved all afternoon, quietly, methodically, with a specific kind of economy that meant every step was deliberate and nothing was wasted. Hayes registered this in his peripheral awareness and focused on the immediate geometry of the contact positions. Torres, give me the south berm position again. Thermal is stationary, Chief. 875 meters on the south berm. Elevated about 12 feet. I've got heat signature consistent with a person in prone. They are watching the east wall approach. Yes, sir. Hayes stopped at the corner of the east barracks building and held position, running the geometry. The south berm overwatch had line of sight to the east wall. The east wall contact was moving, slow, lateral, working toward the maintenance access point. The north gate contact had not moved in 90 seconds, which meant either they were waiting for the overwatch to clear the approach or they were secondary, a blocking position in case the primary contacts needed to extract north. 3-man setup. Coordinated. The overwatch at 875 meters was the force multiplier. Any action against the east wall contact would be visible from that position, and someone with a long gun at that distance in the current thermal conditions could generate significant problems. I need that overwatch cleared first, Hayes said. He didn't look at her when he said it. He didn't have to. She was already moving, finding the angle, calculating the geometry from her position to the south berm at 875 meters and 17-knot crosswind. Wind is from the northwest, 17 to 20 knots, she said quietly. It was not a question and not a request for confirmation. It was data being shared in real time, the way people who do this professionally share relevant calculations. Confirmed, Torres said over the radio. She found a supported position against the corner of the barracks. Bipod deployed. 2 seconds of setup. The cold ground under her. The night sky above the berm where a thermal signature sat at 875 meters in the dark. I need the shot when you're ready, Hayes said. He said it without qualification. Webb, to Hayes' left, was watching this with an expression that had moved past skepticism into something that didn't have a clean name. He was watching a girl in an oversized parka in the dark on Christmas Eve settle into position at a military facility in the Mojave, and whatever he had thought about the afternoon's performance, this was different. The afternoon had been evaluation. This was the rifle fired. 875 meters in the dark, 17-knot crosswind, night thermal conditions, no spotting confirmation, 1 round. The thermal signature on Torres' screen dropped and did not move again. Contact south is down, Torres said, and there was nothing in his professional voice that acknowledged the extraordinary thing that had just been said. Move, Hayes said. They moved. The east wall contact was at 60 meters and still lateral when Hayes and Webb came around the maintenance access corner and issued challenge. The figures stopped, assessed the geometry, and made the kind of decision that people make when they have done their tactical mathematics and found that the numbers don't work in their favor. He went for an alternative. He moved for the drainage culvert on the east side, which was the correct tactical choice given the position of Hayes and Webb, which meant whoever had designed this knew the facility layout. That detail, they know the layout, arrived in Hayes's consciousness and was immediately set aside because the North Gate contact was now in motion. Torres calling it over radio, North Gate contact is moving, bearing south toward the barracks, armed, moving fast. 2 active contacts, no overwatch. The geometry was manageable. The north contact was moving fast through the facility's shadow zones, using the positions that someone with facility knowledge would know. East of the motor pool, north of the supply building, which gave cover from the main barracks windows. Hayes was tracking on radio when Webb made contact at the drainage culvert. Webb was brief and professional. The east wall contact was down. The north contact had made it to the supply building wall and was moving along it. Hayes could see the figure in the facility's exterior lighting, dark clothing, combat load, moving with trained urgency. 40 meters. 35. The figure was going to reach the barracks door. The rifle fired again. Once. 31 meters. The figure fell and did not get up. Hayes looked back. She was still in position. The rifle adjusted. The angle from the barracks corner to the supply building's northern wall. She had tracked the moving contact through the darkness and made a shot on a moving target at 31 meters in the dark. Headshot. Torres confirmed it over radio before Hayes could ask. 3 contacts. 3 headshots. The overwatch at 875 meters. The east wall contact. The north gate mover at 31 meters mid-stride. All 3 eliminated. The time from first shot to third shot was 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Hayes moved to confirm the north contact, and it was as he crouched that he noticed the thing that changed the meaning of everything. The contact was not bleeding. Hayes put his hand to the man's neck and felt a pulse, strong and regular. He looked at the man's face. There was impact bruising on his temple and what appeared to be a non-penetrating impact mark, not a kill wound. A training munition. Precision placed to achieve simulation of an incapacitating headshot while producing exactly 0 permanent damage to the target. Hayes stood up slowly. He stood there in the cold desert night, 29 degrees, the wind running, the stars overhead, and put together the architecture of the past 4 hours with the information he had just acquired. Vance's voice came over the facility radio at exactly that moment, calm and clear from wherever he was observing. Evaluation complete, Master Chief. All parameters exceeded. Stand down. Hayes didn't say anything for a long moment. He looked at the man on the ground, who was beginning to regain consciousness in the groggy, disoriented way of someone hit by a precision-placed, non-lethal impact round. He looked back toward the barracks corner where she was already standing, rifle at low ready, watching him. Live stress test, Hayes said. Confirmed, Vance said. Stress assessment parameters included realistic threat presentation, live movement, overwatch engagement at 875 under night conditions, and engagement of a moving target at close range under time pressure. A pause. She exceeded every expected parameter. Hayes walked back toward her. She was standing very still in her oversized parka, rifle held professionally at low ready, watching his face as he came toward her. She was 17. She had just done, in 4 minutes and 17 seconds of what felt like live combat, 3 headshot engagements across a range of conditions from close quarters to near 900 meters, in the dark, in the cold, in circumstances designed to be maximally disorienting and pressure-filled. And she was standing there watching him approach with the same quality of attention she had given everything else today, full presence, no performance, no demand for recognition. You knew it was a test, Hayes said. It came out as half statement, half question. She considered this for a moment. I thought it might be. When? When the thermal pattern on the south berm was too clean. A real overwatch would be harder to pick up on camera. The heat signature was consistent but too even, like someone was using a portable warmer rather than actual body heat. She paused. and the North contact was moving through positions that required facility knowledge. Nobody has that unless they've been briefed. He looked at her for a long moment in the cold. But you engaged anyway. I engaged as if it was real, she said. Because if I was wrong, I needed to have engaged as if it was real. She met his eyes. My father taught me that too. He said the cost of treating a real threat like a test is too high to justify treating tests differently than real threats. Hayes had been a Navy SEAL for 16 years. He had been taught by some of the most capable professionals his field produced. He had spent years learning variations of exactly the principle she had just articulated, and he had never heard it stated more precisely or with less need for surrounding explanation. He put out his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then shook it. Her grip was firm, brief, and completely unsentimental. Good work, Hayes said. She nodded once. The way you nod when the work is done and was done right and the acknowledgement is accurate and sufficient. They brought the 3 men inside. All 3 were conscious within 20 minutes of the final engagement. The non-lethal impact rounds Vance's team had used were precision-calibrated, designed to simulate terminal trauma without producing it, a technology Hayes was aware existed in classified inventory, but had never personally witnessed deployed in an evaluation context. The men were contractors, professional actors in the most dangerous sense of the word, former military, current program assets, people whose job it was to behave exactly like the real thing while carrying ammunition specifically engineered to prevent permanent consequence. They were professional and quiet about what had just happened to them, which was itself information. People who had been genuinely defeated in combat did not carry themselves with the quiet competence of men who had simply completed a scheduled assignment. The Overwatch man, the one she had dropped at 875 meters in 17-knot crosswind in the dark, sat on the barracks bench with an ice pack against his temple and a cup of coffee that Okafor had handed him with a matter-of-fact hospitality that characterized everything Okafor did. The man looked at the ice pack. He looked at the coffee. He looked up at Hayes. That was a hell of a shot, he said. He said it with the specific gravity of a professional paying tribute to a professional, with no performance in it. Wasn't me, Hayes said. The man absorbed this. He looked toward the corridor where she had gone to return the rifle to the armor. His expression shifted in the way that expressions shift when the mind is quietly revising a prior assumption. Huh. He held the coffee cup in both hands and didn't say anything else. Webb was at the range control console reviewing the sensor logs, working backward through the engagement sequence with the thoroughness of someone who needed to understand a thing completely before he could accept it. Torres was helping him. Hayes could hear their voices from across the room. The muted, focused conversation of 2 professionals reconstructing an event that had not gone the way they would have predicted. The Overwatch shot, Torres said. Look at the wind reading at time of fire. Gust hit right at release. She fired into the gust. Again, Webb said. Again. A pause. That's not a fluke, Webb said. You don't fluke that twice. You don't fluke that once, Torres said. Hayes left them to it. He walked down the corridor toward the weapons vault, and on the way he passed Vance, who was standing near the east corridor window looking out of the range, his hands still clasped behind his back in the posture he had maintained since arriving. The expression on Vance's face was the one Hayes associated with people who were watching a long-term calculation arrive at its expected answer. Not surprise. Confirmation. How long have you been running her? Hayes asked. He kept his voice at a level that was conversation rather than accusation, because he was genuinely asking, and genuine asking is not accusation. Vance turned from the window with the slowness of someone who has been expecting this question and is not in any hurry now that it has arrived. 14 months of program, he said, and before that, her father was running her. Since she was 8. He let that settle. He filed candidacy documentation with the program when she was 9 years old. Standard process for operators who identify high potential family members. The program doesn't recruit children. It receives documentation, monitors development longitudinally, makes contact when circumstances meet threshold criteria. Threshold criteria, Hayes repeated. Vance heard the tone. When the candidate is of age, when existing support structures are insufficient, when the candidate meets minimum evaluation requirements, and when the candidate consents. He looked at Hayes steadily. She consented. repeatedly, at every program milestone. The documentation is extensive and unambiguous on that point. She's 17. She was 17 when she consented. She had been 18 months without adequate guardian support at that point. The alternative we were offering compared favorably to the alternative she was facing. He paused. Her father understood that the worst outcome of his work would be her being left with exceptional capability and no support structure to use it safely. He built the documentation so that if the worst happened, the program would have legal and procedural basis to act quickly. Hayes thought about a man standing in northern snow teaching a child to feel wind, teaching her physics, teaching her patience, teaching her all the things that made what happened on the range today possible. A man who had understood, with the specific clarity of someone who lived professionally with mortality probability, that he might not be there when she needed the things he was teaching her to use. He knew he might not make it, Hayes said. He knew the actuarial reality of his work, Vance said. He made preparation accordingly. He turned back to the window. He was, by all accounts in his file, an exceptional father, and a very serious professional. Hayes stood in the corridor for a moment, processing this, and then he went to find her. She was in the weapons vault, which is where she had been when he expected he'd find her somewhere private. She had returned the rifle, completed the post-use documentation in the range log with a thoroughness Hayes was beginning to recognize as characteristic, and was now sitting on the equipment bench with her notebook open, writing. Not anxiously, not processing through visible distress. Writing in the same focused, methodical way she did everything. Information capture, analysis, record-keeping. The habits her father had built. She looked up when he came in. She didn't close the notebook. Vance told me something, Hayes said. He stood near the vault door. About your father's documentation. He prepared for everything, she said. There was no bitterness in it. No anger. She had arrived, Hayes could see, at the particular acceptance that people reach after they have been through the grief and the anger and the impossible unfairness of it and have come out the other side not unscathed but functional. He was that kind of person. He liked everything to have a plan. He sounds like someone I'd have wanted on my team. She was quiet for a moment. He would have liked hearing that. She looked at the notebook. He respected the teams. He talked about you, about operators generally. He said it was the hardest job in the military to do correctly. He said being strong enough was maybe the easy part. He said the hard part was the judgment, knowing when and how and what for. She paused. He spent a lot of time thinking about that. Did he talk to you about it? He talked to me about everything. She said it with a simplicity that contained, Hayes understood, an enormous weight of what it meant to have had that, and what it meant to have lost it. He said I should always understand why before I learned how. He said if you only know how, you're just a tool. He said if you know why, you have some chance of being something more than that. Hayes sat down on the equipment bench across from her, the weapons vault around them smelling of oil and cold metal and the particular mineral cleanness of a well-maintained facility. Outside, he could hear the wind still running across the Mojave Flats, and somewhere in the common area, Okafor had apparently located a radio because there was a quiet sound of something that might have been a Christmas carol filtering through the building. What happens now? Hayes asked. After tonight. She looked at him with a direct quality that was her default setting. You know I can't tell you that. I know. But, she stopped. Something moved in her face, not into the territory of fully visible emotion, but toward it, at the controlled edge. There's more to do. The program has a next phase. Vance has briefed me on it. She closed the notebook. It's not something I can explain, and it's not something I chose lightly. I want you to know that. I know that. I'm not doing this because I don't have other options. She looked at him steadily. I know that's what people will assume. That I'm here because I had nothing else. But I'm here because, she paused, choosing the words with care. Because what he built in me is real. And because there are things in the world that this specific capability can address in ways that other capabilities can't. And because he taught me that capability without application is waste. She looked at the pocket where the photograph was. He died doing something that mattered. I want the thing he built in me to matter too. The vault was quiet. The wind moved outside. That's a 17-year-old saying that, Hayes said gently. Yes, she agreed. And then, after a moment, but it's still true. He couldn't argue with it. He didn't try. At 0113 hours on December 25th, Senior Chief Okafor located, in the depths of the facility supply building, a crate of items left by the previous rotation that included, among other things largely uninteresting, a jar of instant hot chocolate powder, a bag of pre-popped holiday popcorn, and a small but functional portable speaker with a battery charge that would last approximately 2 hours. These items, combined with the remaining half of the apple pie, the coffee that had been running continuously since approximately 2,100 hours, and Okafor's chemistry light tree, transformed the common area into something that was not quite a Christmas gathering by any conventional definition, but was in the way of things that happen in strange places among people doing difficult work, close enough to matter. 12 Navy SEALs and a 17-year-old girl with no name on file sat in the cold common room of a classified Mojave facility in the early hours of Christmas morning. Okafor had found what appeared to be a holiday music playlist on the speaker's last-use memory, which was playing at low volume. The kind of music that is simultaneously sentimental and true, that arrives in unexpected places and insists on being acknowledged. Webb was telling a story about a holiday duty rotation in Djibouti 3 years earlier that had somehow involved a camel, a commanding officer's vehicle, and a structural misunderstanding about what constituted an appropriate facility entrance. He was telling it with the practiced timing of someone who had told it before and knew exactly where the laugh was going to come. And when it came from around the room, including from her. Hayes heard her laugh for the first time, a brief, genuine sound. Not performed, not cautious. The laugh of someone who had forgotten for a moment that they were being careful. Torres had acquired a deck of cards from somewhere and was engaged in a game with 2 of the junior petty officers. Diaz was in his habitual corner position, watching the room with the quiet contentment of someone who liked being present for things without needing to be at the center of them. Okafor had his Bible open on the table beside his coffee, not performing devotion but genuinely reading, the way he did on nights when the work of the previous hours called for something that went past practical thinking. She was sitting between Hayes and Webb, the desert Noel patch on the table in front of her, her hot chocolate held in both hands. She was not quite relaxed. Hayes doubted she was fully relaxed in any environment, but she was present in a way that was different from the operational precision of the afternoon. She was here, in this room, with these people, on this night. She was allowing herself to be in it. Can I ask you something? Torres said, from his card game, with the directness of youth. She looked over. Depends on the question. When you're on the gun, at the long ranges, what does it feel like? Like in your head. He shook his head at his own phrasing. I know that sounds weird. No, she said. She thought about it seriously. It feels like, you know how some places are very quiet. Like genuinely quiet. Not just no noise, but actually quiet, where your whole body gets still. Torres nodded. It feels like that. When everything's right. When the position is right and the breathing is right and the environmental read is right. There's a moment before the shot where everything gets very, she paused, looking for the exact word. Geometrically clear. Like I can see the physics. Not imagine it. See it. The line between the muzzle and the target, the arc, the correction for wind and drop, the timing of my own biology, heartbeat, respiration. It all becomes one picture. She looked at the patch on the table. My father called it the quiet shot. He said the best shots don't feel like much from inside. The struggle, if there is one, is everything before the shot. The shot itself, when it's right, is just completion of something that was already decided. The room was quiet for a moment. Your father, Webb said, and the sharpness that had been in his voice the whole afternoon was entirely gone, was clearly not a normal human being. She smiled, a full one this time, real and unguarded. No, she said, he wasn't. 0347 hours. Christmas morning. The common area had quieted. Several of the team were asleep in their chairs. Torres had lost badly enough at cards to call it, and was horizontal on one of the bench seats. Okafor was still at the table, Bible closed now, nursing the last of the coffee with the deliberate pace of a man making something lost. The chemistrolite tree had dimmed slightly as the lights aged, giving the green glow a softer quality that was, Hayes thought, actually an improvement. She was asleep. She had fallen asleep sitting upright against the wall, the desert knoll patch in her closed hand, her head tilted slightly to the left the way children sleep when they are genuinely deeply under and their bodies have overridden the vigilance they maintain when awake. In sleep she looked exactly what she was, 17 years old, small in her oversized parka, in a facility built for people twice her age doing work that most of the world would find disturbing if they understood it clearly. Hayes sat with his coffee and looked at her sleeping and thought about Ellie in San Diego, 9 years old, who believed her father was too busy to be home on Christmas. He thought about the girl in front of him and her father in the snow, filling out paperwork on a 9-year-old because he understood probability. He thought about legacy and transmission and the things you build in people that outlast you whether you intended them to or not. He thought about what it cost. Because it cost something. He could see that clearly even in what she didn't say, even in the precision of her explanations and the carefulness of her presence, the constant calibration of what to share and what to protect, the habit of withholding that had been built into her alongside the habits of wind reading and breath control and geometric clarity. You didn't produce that kind of capability without cost. The question was always whether the cost was paid willingly and whether what it purchased was worth it to the person paying. She had said it was. She had said it twice, in different ways, and each time with the specific weight of a person who had genuinely examined the claim rather than producing it reflexively. Hayes believed her. He also knew that at 17, the full accounting of what anything costs is not yet complete. The bill for certain choices arrives in installments over years, and some of the later installments are the heaviest ones. But he was not her father. He was a Master Chief Petty Officer on skeleton holiday duty who had been given an authorized evaluation to run and had run it. What he felt about the larger situation was his own business and would remain so. He reached into his kit and produced a small notebook, the personal kind, not an official range log. The kind he used for things he wanted to record for reasons that were not officially required. He wrote the date, December 25th. He wrote the facility designation and the wind conditions. He wrote, 4 rounds, 4 headshots. He wrote, she fired in the gust. He wrote, she said her father called it the quiet shot. He closed the notebook and finished his coffee. At 0512, Vance appeared in the doorway of the common area. He was dressed for travel, coat, the document case, the same composed expression he had arrived with. He looked at the room, at the sleeping team members, at Okafor still awake at the table, at Hayes, at her sleeping against the wall. He cleared his throat softly, not to wake the room, to wake her specifically. She was awake immediately, not gradually, not the slow surfacing that most people do from deep sleep, but immediately present, eyes open and tracking the room before her head had finished its adjustment. The vigilance was there before the rest of her caught up, and Hayes noted this with a feeling that was complicated by several things he didn't want to examine right now. She looked at Vance. She understood what it meant. She stood up, picked up her pack, tucked the desert knoll patch into the front outer pocket where it would be the first thing visible. She looked around the room, at Okafor, who raised his coffee cup to her, at the sleeping Torres, at Diaz, who had woken somewhere in the last few minutes and was watching from his corner with his usual quiet attention. She looked at Hayes last. He stood up. He put out his hand again, because it was the right gesture and the right distance, acknowledgement without sentimentality, respect without claim. She shook it. Firm, brief, same as before. Happy Christmas, he said. Something moved in her face at that. At those 2 words on that specific morning with their specific gravitational weight, the morning that had for 6 years been the anniversary of the worst day of her life and was now also this. What they had made of it here, in the cold, with apple pie and a chemistrolite tree and the specific stubbornness of people who refused to let a day be only one thing. Happy Christmas, she said. She turned and walked with Vance toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped. She didn't turn around. Master Chief. Yeah, he would have liked all of you. She paused. I think he would have liked tonight. She said it to the door, not to the room, her voice even and quiet. I'm going to remember it. She went out the door. The cold came in for a moment, And then the door closed, and the cold was gone. Okafor looked at Hayes. Hayes looked at the closed door. Somewhere in the corner, the portable speaker had cycled back to the beginning of its playlist, and a quiet piece of music, not a carol exactly, something older and slower and more patient, filled the room. Hayes sat down. He finished what was left of his coffee. He looked at Okafor's dimming chemistrolite tree. "Happy Christmas, Senior Chief," he said. "Happy Christmas, Master Chief," Okafor said. The after-action report that Hayes filed on December 26 was 3 pages long, which was 2 pages shorter than the standard format allowed for and 1 page longer than he initially intended to write. It documented the evaluation parameters, the conditions, the performance metrics, and the engagement sequence of the stress test. It was accurate, thorough, and classified at the appropriate level. It contained no speculation, no personal observation, and no record of apple pie or chemistrolite trees or the way she laughed when Webb finished his story about the camel. The classified section of the report, the portion routed through the channels Vance had specified, was a single additional paragraph that stated, in the dry formal language of institutional documentation, that the evaluation subject had demonstrated performance exceeding all specified parameters across all assessment categories, including static precision marksmanship, environmental adaptation, night engagement, moving target engagement, and decision-making under operational stress. It recommended advancement to next program phase. Hayes signed it, sealed it, and sent it through the appropriate routing. He did not hear anything for 6 months. In those 6 months, the world continued at the pace and in the directions that the world chooses for itself regardless of what any individual would prefer. Hayes returned to San Diego in January and had the specific conversation with Ellie about Christmas that he had been avoiding, which went better than he deserved and worse than he hoped, which was the honest average of most conversations worth having. He ran 2 training rotations, attended a planning conference in Virginia, completed a required evaluation cycle, and did not think about the Mojave with any more frequency than he could manage, which was more than he would have estimated, but less than it might have been. Webb made Petty Officer First Class in February and bought everyone on the team drinks and gave a speech that was better than Webb's speeches had any right to be, which suggested that Webb contained reserves not yet fully inventoried. Torres qualified as a sniper and did not say anything when he posted his results. But Hayes noticed that he had quietly adjusted his personal shooting log to include wind flag observation timing for the first time, a habit that had not been in his methodology before the 24th of December. Diaz made another patch. He did it the following Christmas, and then the one after. He called it Desert Knoll, and he made 12 of them and gave them to the same 12 men and never explained why, except that when Hayes asked him once, Diaz said, with characteristic economy, because some nights deserve to be remembered. Hayes kept his on the shelf in his quarters next to a photograph of Ellie and a small piece of shrapnel from a vehicle that had been involved in an incident in a place that was still listed in official records as undisclosed location. Objects that marked the nights worth remembering. It was a Tuesday in June, 6 months and 1 week after Christmas, when the package arrived at the base facility through an internal routing channel that had no sender identification, no return address, and a classification marking that Hayes recognized from one previous context only. It was a standard envelope. Inside was a single photograph. She was in it. That was the first thing he confirmed and the thing his eyes went to before anything else. She was standing with a group of, he counted, 7 others. All of them in the kind of non-specific tactical gear that exists specifically to prevent affiliation identification. No patches, no insignia, no unit markings, no flag designation, nothing that would place them in any organization that officially existed. The location appeared to be arid and elevated, rock formation in the background, dust and dry heat visible in the image quality even in a still photograph. She was standing at the left of the group, not centered, not featured, just present in the way that people who don't need to be featured are present. On her left shoulder, visible against the clean dark fabric of a jacket, was a small patch, 2 inches across, a white snowflake design on a field of dark green with a small star at the center. Desert Knoll. She was wearing it. She had worn it to wherever this photograph had been taken, in whatever operation or deployment or program phase had produced this image, in a location that was probably not on any map he was authorized to see. She had worn it, and someone had taken a photograph and sent it to him through channels that shouldn't have been available for informal correspondence but were apparently available for this. He turned the photograph over. On the back, in handwriting that he did not recognize but that had a quality of precision and control that he found immediately familiar, the handwriting of someone who was deliberate with every mark they made. There was a single line. Some legends are forged when the world is celebrating. That was all. No name, no rank, no unit, no program designation, no operational details, no future communication implied or offered. Hayes read the line twice. He looked at the photograph again. He looked at the patch on her shoulder, at the easy way she was standing in the group, not separated from them, not isolated, genuinely among them, and at the expression on her face, which even in the small scale and limited resolution of the photograph he could read, after one night of apple pie and cold coffee in a chemistrolite tree, with reasonable confidence. She was not happy in the way that the word usually means. Not light, not uncomplicated, not free of what had been paid to get here. But she was something that was in the same family as purposeful and that had, at its edges, something that was in the same family as peace. The peace of a person doing the thing they were built to do in the company of people who understood what that meant. Her father's peace, Hayes thought. He had seen it in the photograph she had shown him in the East Corridor. The same quality, the same origin, built by the same hands and shaped by the same loss and pointing, as it had always been pointing, in the direction of something that mattered. Hayes went to his shelf. He picked up the Desert Knoll patch, the one Diaz had made and given him on Christmas Eve 6 months earlier, and he held it in his hand for a moment. The green fabric, the small white snowflake, the star at the center, a simple object carrying a disproportionate amount of meaning, the way simple objects do when they are present at the right moment. He put the patch back on the shelf beside the photograph of Ellie and the piece of shrapnel. He put the photograph of her, of the 7-person unit with no insignia, in the arid elevation somewhere, with her patch on her shoulder and her father's eyes in the quiet that was both knowledge and cost, beside the patch. Arranged them carefully, the way you arrange things that mark the nights worth remembering. He thought about the photograph for several weeks. Not obsessively, not with the frequency of someone who hasn't yet processed a thing, but with the returning attention you give to objects that have lodged in the part of your understanding that doesn't take direction well. The part that works on its own schedule and surfaces its conclusions when it's ready. What he kept coming back to was the line. Some legends are forged when the world is celebrating. He had turned it over from multiple angles, trying to determine the precise weight of it. Was it a statement of pride? A statement of grief? Was she claiming the category of legend for herself? Or was she speaking about something larger, a class of person, a type of story, the particular narrative thread that runs through human history of people whose most significant moments happen in the margins of celebration, in the cold and the dark and the overlooked hours when everyone else is somewhere warm and accounted for? He thought about her father in the northern snow, teaching a child to feel wind while the world was doing something else. Teaching physics and patience and the geometry of long-range consequence while the world ate Christmas dinner and opened packages and sat in warmth. A man preparing his daughter for a future he hoped she would never need and that he understood she probably would, making himself into a transmission mechanism for things that needed to survive him, doing the most important work of his life in the cold and the quiet. He thought about Christmas Eve in the Mojave. 12 SEALs on skeleton duty who hadn't volunteered for it, eating apple pie under green chemistrolite, watching a girl shoot things that shouldn't be shootable in conditions that made the math unkind, having a night that none of them would officially document or formally acknowledge but that none of them would forget. He thought about what it meant to forge something. The metallurgical metaphor, the application of heat and pressure and work to raw material to produce a shape that serves a purpose. The understanding that the process is not comfortable and that the material is changed fundamentally and that what you produce is something that the raw material could not have been on its own without the specific combination of force and temperature and time. She had been forged. Her father had begun the process with cold mornings and wind and the patient repetition of a teaching that understood its own purpose even when she hadn't. The program had continued it. The night in the Mojave had been, perhaps, a tempering, That final stage of the process where the shaped material is brought to a specific temperature and cooled rapidly to fix the hardness, to set the final properties. And she was out there now, in some location the photograph did not name, doing something the records would probably never reflect, wearing a 2-inch fabric patch on her shoulder that connected her to one cold night in December when 12 strangers had been decent to her and opened their last apple pie and let her be, for 4 to 5 minutes, a person in a room rather than an asset in a program. She had kept it. Of all the things she carried into whatever came next, she had kept that. Hayes thought this said something important, though he could not have produced a clean sentence about exactly what. Webb came by his quarters that evening, not officially, just the knock and the entrance that characterized Webb's particular social style, which operated on the assumption that presence was welcome unless actively countermanded. He saw the photograph immediately, because Webb was observant in the way that people who have survived by being observant tend to be observant even when survival is not immediately at stake. He picked it up. He studied it for a moment with the focused attention he had given the range sensor logs in December. That how? Yeah. He turned the photograph over. Read the line on the back. Read it again. Put the photograph back on the shelf with the care of someone who understood that it was being displayed rather than stored. Ghost unit, he said. Not a question. Looks like. No insignia on any of them. No. Webb stood looking at the shelf. At the patch. At the photograph beside it. You know what I keep thinking about, he said. Tell me. That third shot. The 1,000-meter shot in the gust. He shook his head slowly, the way he had been shaking his head in December when he reviewed the sensor logs, still working through it 6 months later the way precision things lodge in precision minds. She fired into the gust. She used it. At 1,000 meters. He paused. I've been shooting for 12 years. I have never, not once, used the wind. I've always been fighting the wind. He looked at Hayes. She uses it. Her father taught her, Hayes said. He said wind at long range isn't an obstacle. He said it's information. Webb was quiet for a moment. That's what she told you. Yeah, that's what she said. Wind is information. He nodded slowly. Yeah. He looked at the photograph one more time. She's going to be something. I think she already is, Hayes said. Webb didn't argue with that. He also didn't agree out loud, because Webb's version of the highest respect was silence where argument used to be. He left the way he came, casual and direct, and Hayes heard him in the corridor for a moment and then heard nothing. Hayes took out his personal notebook, the one he had written in at 0347 on Christmas morning while she slept against the wall with the patch in her hand. He read what he had written. The date. The wind conditions. 4 rounds, 4 headshots. She fired in the gust. She said her father called it the quiet shot. He turned to a new page. He wrote, June, following Christmas. He wrote the photograph notation, enough to identify it without identifying anything that needed protecting. He wrote the line from the back of the photograph in full, exactly as she had written it. He wrote, she kept the patch. He closed the notebook. There was a protocol, in programs like the one Vance represented, against maintaining unofficial records of personnel or operations. Hayes was aware of this. He was also aware that there was a separate and older protocol, not written in any manual, that held that some things should be remembered by someone who was there, that the institutional record was not the only record that mattered, that the nights worth remembering deserved more than classification markings and redaction bars. Her father had understood this. He had built her from memory, from accumulated record, from long nights of observation and practice and documented assessment, from the particular insistence that the things he taught her be logged and preserved and available when they were needed. He had been a keeper of records on behalf of his child, for a future neither of them could fully see. Hayes was not her father. He was a Master Chief Petty Officer who had been on the range when she shot, who had been in the corridor when she held the photograph, who had been in the common room when she laughed at Webb's story. He was a witness. The least he could do for a witness was to keep an accurate account. He put the notebook back on the shelf, beside the patch and the photograph and the shrapnel from the undisclosed location. Arranged them carefully. Left them. Outside. The San Diego July was doing what San Diego July does, warm and coastal and loud with the ordinary noise of a city that didn't know about the Mojave in December, or the line on the back of the photograph, or the father in the northern snow who had spent years building something that could survive the worst day. The world was celebrating something, or would be soon. The way the world always is. Somewhere there's always celebration, always the gathered warmth and the lit windows and the sense that this particular moment is the one worth gathering for. And in the margins of that, in the cold places and the dark places and the distances too far for most people to look, there are people doing the work that margins require. Forged there, living there, carrying small patches on their shoulders that say, I was somewhere, once, with people who were decent to me on the worst anniversary of my life, and I have not forgotten. Hayes left the shelf and went to call his daughter. There are children who are shaped by loss into weapons. This is a fact of the world, uncomfortable and consistent across history, and it produces people who are extraordinary in their capability and complex in their cost. And the question the world perpetually fails to answer well is what it owes them in return for what it has made of them. She had answered the question for herself on the floor of an East Corridor in December, with a photograph of her father in her hands. She had answered it with the certainty of someone who had genuinely examined the terms and agreed to them, not from lack of alternatives, but from a specific understanding of what the thing she carried was worth and what it could address that other things could not. Her father had built her to survive. She had decided, on her own, to do more than survive, to use the surviving for something. That decision, made at 17, in the cold, with full understanding of what it cost, was either the bravest thing Hayes had ever encountered or the most heartbreaking, and he had spent 6 months and several sleepless hours coming to the conclusion that it was both of those things simultaneously and that the simultaneous nature of it was not a contradiction but the entire point. And if you know someone who has been 3 seconds too slow at something and has not found their way back yet, share this with them. Not because it will fix anything, but because sometimes a story can be the exact weight a person needs to understand that what they are carrying was never meant to be set down. It was meant to be aimed. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment, because your words in this space are part of what makes the next story worth telling. We will see you for the next one.